Hello everybody, this is Ryan over High Carb Regenerator. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Today, I'm going to watch this Ray Peat. I haven't found any real videos other than one that's like 5 hours long of actual video of this guy. So here's Sugar Part 1. I know a lot of you have said that he likes to talk about saturated fats. I don't know if he talks about this as kind of a reaction thing, but unfortunately, I might put like a video over this so people have something to watch. This is kind of going to be more of a podcast style.
Thank you so much for joining us again. Would you first give the listeners who perhaps have just tuned in and maybe never listened to the show or never heard you on our shows before, a little bit about your background?
Okay. In the 50s and 60s, I was...
Oh, so this dude's been around, boy, 50s and 60s.
I was studying and teaching in the humanities, but I spent a lot of time reading at the science library of the University of Oregon, and so I eventually decided to get a PhD in biology, physiology, so I could use their laboratory equipment.
Mike Menser used to call PhDs piled high in dog shit, but, you know, some of them are good.
As well as their library. But I never really considered myself part of the
and Mike Menser was a little out there as, you know, so.
Academic, scientific.
Not saying all doctors or all PhDs are bad, so don't go hating on me in the comments.
Community, I just got what I could from their culture, and have tried to see things that are useful rather than just abstract, and that has meant that I concentrate on small molecules rather than genes and the big fancy molecules. So water, carbon dioxide, salt, calcium, sugar, and fats have been the things that I study most.
Okay, well, perhaps, Dr. Peat, would you first qualify the term good sugar for our listeners, and then we'll get into the facts and figures, as it were, surrounding sugar and why they're so important for us?
Man, you can tell these doctors are phobic of sugar, boy. I mean, he didn't even want to say the word. I mean, I could be wrong, but I mean, you hear that inflection like, I can't say it.
Sugar is really the ideal energy exchange substance. It's useful for all organisms practically, and it's something that we can store and turn it into, use it for building all of the big molecules, and when it's metabolized, it releases carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is really a more universal substance than oxygen for the support of life.
Mike, you had told us in one of our previous shows that there are organisms who can live without oxygen, known as anaerobic organisms, but there are no organisms that can live without carbon dioxide.
Right, and
it's interesting.
It turns out that it isn't just mosquitoes and fleas and bed bugs that are attracted to carbon dioxide, but the flatworms and nematodes and such, that they're
I think nematodes is the longest living creature on this planet.
Studying as simple models of metabolism and aging, they seek out a fairly high concentration of carbon dioxide as more favorable for their living conditions.
So as our cells use sugar more effectively, then are we producing a larger amount of carbon dioxide?
Yeah, and when we produce more carbon dioxide, that means we inhibit the production of lactic acid, which is not only a wasteful way to use sugar, but lactic acid has a signal function that turns on a whole range of inflammatory processes. And
so if you're an athlete, basically, and you have a very low lactic acid threshold, adding sugar sounds like it would help with that, according to this. So especially swimmers, I know swimmers hit that threshold quick, and whoever can hold out is the one who wins the race.
they have talked for decades about tumors producing lactic acid, but lactic acid also promotes tumors, and all of these.
So that would completely dissolve the idea that sugar causes cancer. I mean,
Inflammatory processes. So you want your sugar to metabolize into carbon dioxide, which will then prevent the
stuff that's out these days.
dangerous overproduction of lactic acid.
And can somebody overdose themselves on lactic acid from eating fermented cultured products?
Yeah, I got interested in that a long time ago when I found a nice kefir product that tasted good, and I would drink a pint of it for lunch. And I came down with a migraine every time I did that, and that caused me to read more about the metabolism of lactic.
That actually makes a lot more sense. I know I keep cutting in here, but that makes a lot of sense because stuff like kombucha and just other things, as soon as I drink it, I get a burning sensation. It's not great, so I stopped using any of that.
Lactic acid, it is normally produced by stress when you use your muscles faster than your lungs can keep the oxygen supply adequate. The lactic acid is circulated into your bloodstream, reaches the liver, and your liver has to spend extra energy to turn the lactic acid back into glucose, which it then sends back to the muscles. But meanwhile, it's depleting your liver of any stored glycogen it had just to get rid of the lactic acid and turn it back into glucose. So
it's wasting the sugar that your liver has stored as glycogen.
Yeah, and I happened, because I probably was hypothyroid, I happened to be so sensitive that I got a migraine just from...
There you go. So a lot of people who are having thyroid issues, this is also good for.
Drinking a package of the kefir.
Because
and that would explain why I probably had burning, because that was back when my thyroid was pretty low.
the lactic acid was actually lowering your blood sugar then.
Yeah, and since then I've run into quite a few people who were having various symptoms every time they ate a fermented product with lactic acid in it. The vinegar type fermentation it's slightly toxic, but it doesn't participate in that blood sugar disturbing effect that lactic acid does.
Right, so it's all the probiotic.
Well, yeah, some of the probiotic bacteria that make lactic acid in themselves, they can produce other substances that are protective, but you don't want them producing lactic acid from the sugar you.
So basically, if you have hypothyroid, if you have insulin resistance, the last thing you should be doing, it sounds like, is having any kind of probiotic. And I can attest to that because every time I would go on them, I'm like, oh, I must be needing a probiotic. But every time I went on that stuff, I had so many issues, and a lot of, if a lot of you have been watching my channels, it's not been on here for a year. It's coming up like in a couple months here in a year. And I always kept gaining. And some of the stuff that I was taking was probiotics.
You eat, the sugar you eat should be absorbed up in the first part of your intestine where there are no bacteria to speak of.
Or there shouldn't be, right?
Yeah. And for various reasons, sometimes the bacteria will migrate up there from a sluggish bowel and so on. Or if you eat poorly digested materials like too many starches.
Oh, McDougall wouldn't want to hear that.
Or fibrous mixtures of starch and carbohydrates. These things will not be absorbed, and so they'll go down and feed the bacteria, and then the bacteria can make lactic acid and other worse toxins from them.
Okay, I think it's important that a few moments ago you mentioned the fact that glycogen...
I hope he expands on the starches.
That's normally stored in the liver as a storage form of sugar is used to convert lactic acid when it's been produced in the absence of sufficient oxygen from muscular activity to create the conversion of...
And that would really mean why that would really give a good clue as to people who go on a fruit diet lose weight quickly, because you wouldn't have any of that with it. I don't, other than maybe durian and jackfruit. Durian and jackfruit, if you're having issues with digestion, durian and jackfruit are the two that I would kick off.
Lactic acid back
or kick out of your diet
into glucose. And what I wanted to just bring out is that for most people that are listening, perhaps you may not understand it, but
that would also explain why the rice diet works so well, because white rice really digests quick. I mean, if you go on a rice diet, you don't have much coming out, number two, the first couple of days, because it digests like kind of almost like a fruit. And all the fruit people are going to come on here and yell at me like they did the last time, but whatever, dude.
That the liver is a good storage organ for glycogen as a form of sugar to be used in times when it's needed. But would you expand on that in terms of how much glycogen is the liver able to store? How long do people have
before they have to, or how long can people go with just eating proteins or not eating before their liver goes, okay, I don't have enough, and then they start eating themselves? This
brings out why sugar is big. It will start to bring out why sugar is good, and then we can keep delving into the details and the facts.
If your thyroid and other hormones are in the right concentration, your liver should be able to store at least 8 hours of glycogen, so that everyone should be able to get through the night on the amount of glycogen in their liver without resorting to other sources of energy. But when your thyroid is a little low, or, for example, if your estrogen is too high, or other things are...
This is why I tell you to get the blood work done.
...interfering, then your liver sometimes can hardly store any glycogen.
And if you got a fatty liver, I'm assuming it can't store anything.
And typically, when your glycogen runs out, you send out a surge of adrenaline, which will squeeze the last little bit of glucose out of your liver. It activates the dissolution of glycogen, turning it into glucose. And when your liver can't respond to the adrenaline anymore, the first sign of depleted glucose is you might feel shaky and cold from the high adrenaline. Then you resort to increased cortisol, which begins breaking down your tissues, turning protein into fat and carbohydrate for energy. And
sounds so bad. This is what's happening to all you sugar phobes, if anybody's watched this far.
Under that,
or anybody who was on the Starvation Nation diet, I would even imagine the 50-50 plate, whatever, the things that don't feed you enough, your body must be going through this a lot.
at extreme condition when you've been out of glycogen long enough to run on cortisol for about a day, your thymus will be dissolved just in a few hours of the intense exposure to cortisol. And when the quickly dissolved tissues, such as the thymus, are gone over the next week or whatever it is that you're not replenishing your sugar, your muscles will atrophy. So that people who fast for a week or two will usually lose more muscle weight than they lose fat because of the very rapid conversion of protein into fuel.
Yeah, your body converts protein into carbohydrates pretty easily.
Under the influence of the cortisol.
Yeah. So whenever you eat a big dose of protein without sugar to back it up, you're going to stimulate the secretion of first insulin to dispose of the digested amino acids from the protein, and the insulin, which properly disposes of the amino acids, is going to lower any circulating glucose and tend to turn it into fat. And as the glucose goes down, that will drive up your cortisol. So typically a big protein meal will cause a huge surge of cortisol, and some people become...
And this is why keto people can't sleep.
Supposedly diabetic or very hyperglycemic because they eat too much meat unaccompanied by sugar or some carbohydrate.
And that's just because the protein is stimulating the cortisol, and the cortisol is...
Yeah, it's doing its job of
metabolizing
turning protein into sugar and fat.
So it's important to...
So you could just eat the sugar in the first place.
Keep a balance between protein...
Ugh, that word. Pritikin hated that word just as much as I do in a dietary.
Proteins and sugars and...
You should always eat sugars with protein.
Right, and just for our listeners to clarify, sugars, carbohydrates, we're using the term synonymously. They're sugars and carbohydrates are basically the same thing. There's different types of sugars or different types of carbohydrates, starchy carbohydrates.
What? Sugar, lady. I mean, you're a doctor. Piled high in dog shit with this PhDs. Sugar is sugar. Oh.
Versus non-starchy carbohydrates. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit later. But,
Okay, well, you're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor on KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM. And from 7:30 until the end of the show at 8 o'clock, you're invited to call in with any questions, either related or unrelated, to this month's topic of sugar and the benefits of sugar. The number here, if you live in the area, is 923-3911, or if you live outside the area.
All right. I think I've heard all I need to hear. I know that he talks about saturated fats. If anybody has a good video of that, send it to me, and I will do a somewhat reaction video to that as well. I like what the guy has to say, and if you've got a lot of health issues, I mean, really, this is one that you would want to listen to, this whole interview, so I'll link it down below. If you think this would help somebody, be sure to share this video, and then they can either watch that or the video that I linked down below. So anyways, like, subscribe, comment, questions. Talk to you next time.